Welcome back to another episode of Rethink Real Estate, folks. Today, we're going to be going through the auction listing presentation pitch and just doing a quick little introduction to that is that this is a bit of a drink from the fire hose perspective of going through the auction pitch from the very beginning and giving a visual element to it. So Chris is going to be adding in the visual element to our presentation as well so that therefore you can see the visuals that we go through and give to a seller. Hopefully this helps with anybody that's trying to practice their auction pitch or anybody that actually needs to understand the auction process a little bit more themselves. This takes you through it in chronological order. Hope it helps and hope you enjoy. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Okay, folks, welcome back to another episode of Rethink Real Estate. One of the most requested episodes that we always get is for me to do the auction presentation that we did in the previous season, which is basically the auction pitch. This pitch that we're going to take you through today is going through the same presentation. It's a very similar one that we'd go through if an agent wanted to learn more about auction or whether or not it's a seller that is considering auction in order to sell their property. This same pitch takes us through it in a chronological order. We go through philosophy of why we do auction and then the nuts and bolts of how it works. This presentation is very visual. The reason it's visual is because I spent years pitching auction just by a verbal perspective and trying to get people to understand the steps in the process to make it make sense. Auction's like a domino effect. You've got to make sure that everything lines up to the end result in order to get somebody comfortable with it. Now remember, with the auction process in North America, it's something incredibly different and we need evidence to defeat disbelief. So we go through our numbers and also we focus on why we do it. Not only how, but the why element and why it's better and comparing it to the traditional sale. The visual element of what I'm going to share with you today really helps sort of connect the dots, so to speak, for a seller, but also for an agent to see where their role is part of it and what's happening. Anyway, long story short, I'm going to dive into the presentation so that therefore that you guys can use this in order to practice maybe the pitch, maybe understanding some of the key points in the sale process or the key points, the trigger points of the sale process of auction to somebody that might be interested. So as we share the screen across is that Mr. and Mrs. Seller or Mr. Agent is how I'm going to refer to it the whole way through, is that the one thing that I want you to realize from the very beginning with the design of the auction process, when we designed it for the North American model, the one thing that we do want to make sure that you understand, it was designed around the premise of that it's not the promise of a price, it is a process to find value. Now, the reason that we have designed it this way is that really we truly believe that where real estate in a traditional sense finds itself in trouble is where there is the prediction of value. An agent will give you an opinion of value, or somebody will give you an opinion of value. It might even be your own. But unfortunately, those opinions that are on the value of your property are typically not willing to write a check. So we wanted to make sure that we use the natural philosophy of auction to find what a property is worth in the marketplace. And it's not the promise of a price. It is a process to find value. But the beautiful part about auction is that you are always in control and you're never obligated to have to say yes. We'll talk about the nuts and bolts of how that all operates shortly, but that is the way that this whole process has been designed. It's not the promise of the price, it is the process to find value. However, a little bit about us. From a global perspective is that we are the largest non-distressed auction company in the world, doing over 13,000 non-distressed auctions every year across many different countries. Originally founded in New Zealand in 1888, Australia and New Zealand do a very large majority of their real estate transactions via auction. So therefore, a couple of years ago, more specifically, probably 8 or 9 years ago, is that we moved over to North America, seeing an opportunity in the North American marketplace, starting in Southern California. And now we operate from Mexico all the way up into Canada from a West Coast perspective and out to Hawaii. We also do auctions in Florida, in Manhattan, in New York, all the way up into Maine. And all across the country is where we've done auctions now, because the process has sort of caught on from a perspective of people doing an auction and seeing the success of it, using it in another sense elsewhere. Our team is behind every step of the way. Our team is an extension of the listing agent's team the whole way through. And we'll talk about the structure of how our team operates with the listing agent the whole way through in a different part of the presentation. But primarily, our auction team is like a co-listing agent along the way, because auction is a different process. For those that are involved, you still need the traditional real estate agent in order to pitch the property, where it is, what it offers, and all of those emotional elements. Our job is to deal in the factual elements alongside and explain the auction and facilitate the auction and negotiation. The benefit to the auction team is being an active third party involved with less attachment to the outcome, because we usually see that attachment to the outcome from a seller or an agent usually clouds judgment and might not paint a very clear picture. Now, a little bit about why auction. The first thing that I want to point out when it comes to auction is our statistics. And I'll take you through a little bit more of this in depth, but I wanted to give you an overview first of all to let you know that we are very numbers orientated. We're very numbers driven, because when we're offering something a little bit different, we need evidence to defeat anybody's disbelief. We wouldn't just simply ask that you trust that we're doing the right thing. We want to show you that we will do the right thing and that we are giving you a process that is superior to that of traditional. So we will compare all of these individual parts to the traditional elements of real estate along the way, so that then you can make a really good judgment call. For example, over the past 12 months in California alone, we've done 1,643 auctions, selling 1,484 of those, giving us a total clearance and success rate of 90.3% success. Now, I want you to understand this, is that when I say clearance, when I say selling, is that no one's ever been forced to sell. None of our clients are in a position where they are obligated to say yes. They can always say no at any point. Now, the success is broken down into 3 stages, and we'll go through all of these 3 stages and how they operate here shortly, but I wanted to take you through where we see the success. 35.5% of the time, we will sell a property prior to auction. An auction starts and it leads up to an auction date, and that's called the pre-auction phase. And if we get an offer that is a great offer, or we get an offer where we don't have a great deal of other interest, but the leverage of and the perception of auction date is giving us a great ability to have leverage in that negotiation, it might be the right decision to accept that offer prior to auction, because on auction day, we might not have that competition. If that's the case, the auction team and the agent and yourself as a seller will certainly make sure that you are communicated to, and we talk through this at all points. That's one of the major points in this. This is very high communication, very high touch. So therefore, at all stages, you'll know what's going on. And if we believe it's the right decision, or if that offer is so far above everyone else, we can obviously accept that prior to auction. That happens 35.5% of the time. A further 46% of the time, the live auction day is where the magic happens. That live, transparent auction where we've gathered all of that competition, that is where we see the success. Now, if in fact we don't get a result that you're comfortable with before auction or on auction day, then usually a further 8.8% of our properties will sell within 10 days after auction, because auction day, while it might not happen on that day itself or at that individual event, it does create a crescendo point where that negotiation starts, and it may take a little bit longer than those individual moments to get that done. But I'll give you an example of what auction day looks like here shortly. A little bit more about the types of properties that we're taking through to the auction process. As you see here, 53% of our properties have been previously listed on the market as a traditional sale that then's been converted over to an auction. Or they might have expired by going through traditional and they didn't know what to do next, so therefore they've come through to the auction process. We don't do any distressed, foreclosed, or REO properties whatsoever, and 37.3% of our properties are new listings to market. Now, we're very proud of that statistic, that it continues to grow, because typically when agents do auctions for the first time, they will then start to offer that process to other listings as a first-time option in order for them to list their property via auction. But either way, that is a statistic that continues to grow for us. But as you can appreciate, when it's a new process, is that a lot of people have to go through the process of elimination of going through traditional first. But I will say this, it means that they do get less later on. However, realistically, auction is the perfect tool to reevaluate that property and revitalize that property. Now, the other thing that I want to make it very clear and make it very clear and make sure that everybody understands is that 93% of the time we sell a property to a primary end user. One of the big misconceptions with auction is, first of all, distressed, and I understand that, but then it's a misconception that we only sell real estate to investors, wholesalers, and people looking to get a deal. When 93% of the time our properties that we sell, the person that ends up buying them is the actual person that is living there, meaning we are getting the highest and best price for that property because the end user, that emotional user, is the one that will pay the most money for it. A little bit about auction versus traditional. One of the things that I want to make sure that you understand is that traditional can become a pricing game of putting the price on the property only then to have to scale it down and publicly embarrassing the property's reputation at that point. I'll give an example of that shortly. But then you also have this other method of sale that a lot of agents have been using over the last number of years called imitation auction. That is where they list the property a little bit lower than what it's worth and try and get bids over and above that in order to try and stimulate the marketplace with these false offer dates, or they're just trying to provoke the marketplace in a different realm. The one thing that I will say to that is that when we first entered particular marketplaces, for example, the Bay Area marketplace is one of the fastest moving real estate marketplace in all of North America, quite possibly the world. They've experienced for the last decade properties that would get 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 offers on those properties over list price. So they were doing what we called imitation auctions. And one of the things that I will say about that is that people don't know what they don't know. And what I mean by that is that they didn't have an alternative method to use, so they thought they were using the method that was getting them the highest price possible. When we first entered the Bay Area marketplace, what we needed to do is prove that the traditional multiple offer situation, if you've got a lot of interest on that property, does not get you the highest result. So what we did is that we would compare very similar properties that were on the marketplace at the same time as our auctions and the results that we were getting. So, for example, we would see properties that were on the marketplace, for example, here that would go on the marketplace. They would put, say, a list price on the property of $800. It would end up selling for $980,000. Now, we would assess that. It would sell within the first 7 days because that would be the typical offer date that they would put on the property. And also, they would get 3 or 4 offers on the property on average. And ultimately, where I'm going with this is that they would only get about 30 groups of people through the front door that would then cultivate those 3, 4, 5 offers on the property. And what that is saying to me is that they're restricting the marketplace to only that period of time. So then we would do an auction on a very similar property locally, and we would always make sure that we had a running mate of a similar listing so that therefore we could compare the results. On average, if we did a bidding to start from of $800,000 on a very similar property than a multiple offer situation traditionally, we would get double the volume of offers on the property prior to auction. That is very important because that means we're stimulating more people to want to be involved. But then the next part of it, we would increase and get at least 8 to 12% more than what the multiple offer situation did traditionally. So this was proving that not only were we getting more interest, more education for our client to make a good educated decision on market value, we were also creating a situation where we would hold on to the property for longer. For example, the average auction is for about 3 weeks, but this is the really staggering point in all of this. Most people sell a multiple offer situation traditionally within the first week, within the first 7 days. With auction, we're holding on to it a little bit longer because we have an excuse to do so because of the auction date. We have found that 57% of the time, the buyer that sees it at the end of week 2 ends up being the highest bidder in a competitive auction environment. So when people say, well, you can't prove you undersold the property, we can, because we have the statistics to show that if you're selling it in the first week, you're likely missing the best buyer for that property 57% of the time. It's a staggering thing to consider, but at least with auction, we don't ever have to worry about that. But all in all, the other part of this process is that that's a really good process for high demand. But auction works beautifully in a low demand marketplace as well. For example, in the recent times, you've seen properties sit on the marketplace for a longer period of time, and we've just come out of a very big bull market in real estate. Here, what I'm showing you now is the death spiral, if you like, of a traditional listing that doesn't follow the prompts that it needs to. For example, a property always starts off in the market with a high ambition of actually trying to get as much as we possibly can, which sometimes can hurt the momentum in the early days. A seller's expectation, it obviously can be curbed from the previous market that we're in and might not be exactly in today's market at that particular time. So therefore, it's usually taking between 4 and 6 weeks, a little bit longer, for a price to be reduced for the first time. But then what happens in that first price reduction, it's typically the smallest price reduction, doesn't do much to help stimulate the property's marketplace. So therefore, another 4 to 6 weeks later, we're reducing the property again. This is where we've really harmed the property's reputation in the marketplace in a traditional sale, and it creates real leverage for anybody looking at it. When somebody walks in the front door, they know immediately that that buyer is in complete control because they've seen the history of the property, they've seen the time on market. Regardless of whether you need to sell it or you don't need to sell it, the perception is that that buyer is in complete control at that point. So therefore, leaving money on the table. The real benefit to auction is that none of this happens in the public forum. And I'll explain why that is a little later. The other part that we're seeing creep back into sales at the moment as well is that the high fallout of rate out of escrow. It's all good and well. I can negotiate somebody to give you whatever offer you want if it's contingent to a cow flying over the moon. Realistically, we're seeing more and more sales actually fall out of escrow because of the contingencies and the messiness of those deals, and people asking for a lot more now because they believe they're in more control. They have a lot more options in a low inventory marketplace still, where they can actually see another property that comes to the market and quickly get out of the sale of your property and move on to that one as well. So it really isn't locking the buyers in. Whereas with auction, because we have the leverage of that auction date, leading into auction date, we can obviously make sure that we clean the deal up as much as possible. Here's an example. Recently put a property into escrow, prior to auction in San Francisco. This property was on the marketplace for 95 days prior to. It was a TIC. Now, these buyers walked into the property, they fell in love with it, and they put an offer in prior to auction to try and stop the auction. They were really our only interest. It was a very difficult sale, difficult circumstances, but they never knew that they were the only buyer interested in that property prior to auction. They only knew that there was an auction date looming. So when we went back to them and we said, hey guys, that's not going to stop the auction, they're like, well, what will? We're like, look, we can't disclose what that is that you might need to just increase your offer. They increased on themselves 3 times without any other competition. And also, prior to actually accepting that offer prior to auction, we said that if you're going to stop the auction, you need to clean up your contingencies, remove your inspection contingency, reduce your finance contingency time, remove your appraisal contingency. All of this because we had the leverage of auction date. We had no other competition on the property, but cleaning up that deal was very important to make sure that it went through, to make sure that buyer was committed and locked in. The benefit of having that auction date looming is sometimes the anonymity that it gives us in the negotiation itself. Now, the final bit of philosophy that I want to share with you and why auction is so effective is that when you go traditionally listing a property, you cast one fishing line out, one hook, one piece of bait, trying to find the buyer. Now, we're all fishing from the same pond here. My theory, though, is that I fish with a net, and that's auction. I cast that net into the marketplace. I drag it in. Now, yes, it's going to collect the good, the bad, and the indifferent. But then at least I get to pick and choose who I want to deal with, put them in the auction arena to really test that they're the right type of person in order to buy the home and get the most money out of them. Casting the net is what auction does, not fishing with one fishing line and one hook. So that's the final bit of philosophy that I'll take you through today. There's lots more that I could go through. However, I want to give you a bit of a visual element and go into the nuts and bolts of how auction works. So for example, this is the best visual element to look at the process. We have the pre-live phase, we have the pre-auction phase, we have the auction day, and we have post-auction. Let's go through the pre-live phase quickly. The pre-live phase, as you'll see here, between 3 to 10 days to get the property live. For example, one of the things that we require on all properties prior to auction day is actually making sure that we get all reports and disclosures and statutory disclosures done up front. Now, this might be different depending on the marketplace that you operate in. For example, in the Bay Area, regardless of whether it's traditional or an auction, everybody always does reports and disclosures up front. In Southern California, nobody does that up front on their listings, but that is a requirement if you're going to do an auction. Home inspection, termite, natural hazard disclosure, preliminary title, and all of the normal statutory disclosures that are signed in escrow have to happen up front, and all of that is disclosed to the buyers at large. Now, I'll talk about how that is disclosed shortly through our Harcourts auction website, but realistically, depending on how long it's going to take to get all that done will depend on if the property's already on the market, taking it and putting it on a hold status, and then we would get all those reports and everything done, okay? Then go back live once we've got all of that stuff done. So 3 to 10 days. If you've already got all the reports and disclosures done, then it's a very easy and quick transition. If it's a new property to market, it's obviously not too much of a deal. It's just getting all of that before the property goes live and is entered into the MLS. Now, once we are going live, all of the agent remarks and the public remarks are then adjusted to our approved remarks that we've had done by the MLS, explaining the auction process in the agent remarks, and in the public remarks, advertising that it's a live auction and the bidding to start from. I'll give you an example of that here shortly. But all in all, this process can take, like I said, between 3 and 10 days, and we provide a calendar of sales so that therefore you know what's happening at every stage. Now, the fees that are involved in order to do an auction, we charge an administration fee of $500 up front, okay? And that is a non-refundable fee. And then our success fee is 0.5% of the sale price. Now, if you're an agent, we can obviously ask the sellers to pay for the administration fee, or we can also ask the sellers to let them know that it will be an additional 0.5% of the sale price, half a point, okay, on top of the commission that you've already negotiated. Depending on the relationship with the client will depend on what you would choose to do. If you're an agent in this situation, we can obviously pitch it to the seller that it's an additional fee, or you can absorb it into your fee depending on where you are at with them. However, our 0.5% applies if it sells before auction, on the day of auction, or within 60 days after. Now, the relationship between auction team and agent is an interesting one from all aspects. And what I mean by that is it really depends on the particular client, the particular listing, and where all of that relationship stands. For example, we can play the effect, and some agents use the auction team as an active third party to really educate the seller and give them the bad news on the marketplace that might not be what they want to hear. Other agents, they don't mind doing that, and they use the auction team to really cultivate the marketplace and get the feedback. Our job is to not have an opinion of value on the property. The auction team's job is from day one to be like a co-listing agent. For example, explaining the auction process to buyers and buyers agents, following buyers and buyers agents up, asking them what their opinion of value is, what they thought of the property, giving them the information about the auction process, also helping with offers prior to auction, meeting with the sellers every week to explain what stage of the auction process we're at, making sure that we meet with the seller prior to auction to give our recommendation on where we think everything's going to end up, or whether we should postpone the auction. We'll talk about that stage here shortly, but it's very high communication. To put it to you this way, we can be as involved or as little involved as possible, but usually our success rate vastly diminishes the less you have us involved. However, that said, is that we're there to respect the relationship with you and client, okay, in order to make sure that we are an active part of it and provide feedback so that the seller can really educate themselves on the marketplace. Now, the auction technology is the other part of all of this in the pre-auction stage that we get ready. So, for example, we have harcourtsauctions.com, which is the backbone of our entire process, running the live auction itself, and where most of our technology is housed. My Auction is our back-end system, which houses all of the documents and helps register people to bid and takes care of all of that registration process. The property portal is what is on our property website, where people can see and download disclosures, make offers. Also, they can register to bid and go through the status of all of those things. And then our live auction and our own bidding platform is housed on harcourtsauctions.com. So, for example, if we were to go over and we were to take a look quickly at harcourtsauctions.com, you would see here, we'd scroll through the front page, and let's say, as you can see, the diversity of properties that ultimately we have on the market. We've got $210,000 in La Mesa, to a $10 million penthouse in New York, okay, to a $1.8 million property in Watsonville in Northern California, to a $2.5 million property in Southern California in San Juan, all the way to another $6.5 million property in New York City. So either way, if we were to click on and we were to have a look at these different properties, it would give you a relative outline to how the property structure is on the website itself. So this property is pending. Okay, it's prior to the auction date, so therefore they've accepted an offer prior to auction. However, this property here, as you can see, is that it's set to go to auction on the 1st of June. Bidding to start from is $2.5 million. Our listing agent on the property is Drew Tashira. You can see all of that information. And here is where people can enter the bidding room on auction day. We want to make sure that this page becomes the central point to refer people to for all of the information they need so they know where to come to on auction day if the property doesn't sell beforehand. Now, this is the Harcourts Auctions property portal. This is where you'll see all of the downloaded disclosures and documents available for people to look at. Now, when a buyer comes here or an agent comes here, they do need to create an account so that therefore we know that they are logging in order to get the information, and so that therefore we can track who is interested in the property. Information when it comes to the auction website is the primary focus with all of this, so we can follow up people accordingly and make sure that we have an understanding of who's interested. So again, you can click the home inspection. It downloads the home inspection for you to look at. You can download all of the package as well so that therefore you can see each individual document. But as you can see, this is the home inspection on the property that you can go through, see what type of condition it's in. Or you can go through and you look at offers, or you can make an offer. This is where you would make an offer prior to auction. Obviously, in this section itself, it's just provoking somebody to do so, to start a conversation. We would never think that somebody's going to put an offer in completely without discussing or seeing the property. However, you can then see the viewers, the people that have looked through the property, the agents that have created a profile, buyers that have created a profile, and then you can see the activities. So, for example, this person here has downloaded the MCA. They've also gone through and downloaded a few different things, and it gives you the log for each individual day and the activity that we've seen. The other part of this as well is that we have global messaging. This is an important part of the process, that then everybody that is involved in the auction that has shown interest in it, we can globally message them about different things and updates. So, for example, if we have an offer prior to auction, we can notify everybody to let them know that it's likely or might sell prior to auction day. But all in all, the really important part about this is that this property here also, this is where they come on auction day in order to register to bid. This is the registration process as well. They click on the registration button. So if we were to go back, because this property here is pending, if we go back and we go to a property that is going to be going to live auction on the day itself, is that then we can show you the registration process. But the registration process itself, going through that, is actually going through and showing you the document. Now, the document itself on auction day, okay, or registering to bid, that is actually a buyer that is going in and signing the document and basically stipulating their terms. This is what I want to bid under, being finance contingency of 14 days or an inspection contingency, and then they would submit it. It's like writing an offer, but without a price, saying that auction day is going to actually be defined, the price will be defined on auction day itself. So if we were to go and click on a property that is going to auction, you'll see that there is a register to bid tab on that individual property portal, or they can just simply click. This is a whole building that we've got going to auction in New York, okay? And if you were to click enter the bidding room, or you were to click also register to bid here, they can then go through, enter their information, or if you're an agent, you can send the registration information over to the clients themselves. And then you can see the status of all of that itself. You can then also download and review the bidding registration paperwork as well. But on auction day, the bidding room itself, as you can see here, is that it opens up. You get to look at the bidding room. It's very similar. You can just watch if you need to, if you're not a registered bidder, okay? But then you'll see here, guys, is that this is the auction day that we've got coming up here shortly. This auction part of the website, okay, is one of which where this will open up and you'll see the live auctioneer, and then you will also be able to bid if you are registered in that capacity and you've gone through and been approved the whole way through. So going back to the presentation, as you can see, there's a lot of intricate parts of all of this. I'm trying to give you a high-level view of that. However, auction day is fueled by our bidding platform, but the process itself from an information standpoint is all handled from Harcourts Auctions, My Auction, and also our property portal. Now, as far as pricing is concerned, this is another part in the pre-auction phase of the process that we have to determine. All of our auctions are done with what is called a non-disclosed reserve price. That non-disclosed reserve price is only known by listing agent and also the auction team. This is where, as I showed you before, sometimes publicly decreasing the price can leave certain residue on the property that you don't particularly want. With a non-disclosed reserve price, the seller's expectations is behind the scenes, meaning that the seller's expectations can be adjusted at any point in time with no public record of that happening. Now, their non-disclosed reserve price doesn't really matter what it is because, again, they're not obligated to accept if it's under or even over it. They're in complete control. Now, we will determine what is called a bidding to start from price. That bidding to start from then becomes the list price on the property. In the public remarks, it's listed that it is a live auction, bidding to start from, and then the price itself. Now, how we determine the bidding to start from is not just simply a set percentage. We take into consideration all other properties that property is in competition with locally, and we really take into consideration the properties that are below that price point. So, for example, this graph shows that if you took a traditional property and you listed it at $1,079,000, you're automatically only going to deal with a certain section of the marketplace. I don't believe that this diagram does it justice. I don't believe that anybody at 900 would ever look at a property at $1,079,000. I think you'd only ever get 1 million plus people looking at it. So automatically, you're only marketing to a select market. Take that same property, do a bidding to start from at $800,000, and they've got a non-disclosed reserve that nobody can see and no one knows of 1.1. You open up the entire marketplace. Now, you might say, well, why do I want people at a lower price point, $800,000, $900,000? Realistically, folks, we get to see this every day of the week, is that we find, and I think it's a very large frustration in the real estate industry, and certainly from our perspective, getting to see this from a bird's eye perspective, is that most of the time buyers only buy because they tell somebody a budget they're comfortable with, and then the agent actually gives them only a select few properties so that therefore the agent doesn't waste their time showing them things they can't afford. When realistically, with the auction process, we opened up to a much larger market. And if a buyer at $800,000 or $900,000 walks into a property that is valued at 1.1 million and it has that value in it, they automatically fall in love because it's better than anything else that they've actually seen in their search. So where I'm going with this is that from our statistics, over 50% of the time, a buyer that has less money than actually meets the seller's expectation ends up outbidding everybody that has the money that would meet seller's expectations, because they will fight for the property harder because it's the better property they've seen. But also, there's a perception in the beginning of this that they may get a deal. So they come into the property, it's actually marketed beautifully. There's way more of an emotional attachment there, which then leads to bigger and better competition the whole way through. So where I'm going is that we're appealing in the pricing strategy to the entire market. I don't want to discriminate any portion of the marketplace, because that could be discriminating the perfect buyer that would pay more given the opportunity. Now, the exposure. This is very simple. The word auction is always going to captivate a lot more interest, but then also our pricing strategy is going to captivate interest. There is no mythical area or portal that we advertise in that you don't advertise in. We advertise in the exact same ones through the syndication of the MLS, but realistically, we get a great deal more interest in the same areas that you market. 51% of the time, we get 51% more showings through the property, even if the property has been listed traditional previously, and over 1,000% more online engagement than properties of like character in a similar marketplace on Zillow, Redfin, Realtor.com, Trulia, all of the other portals. We get over 1,000% more interest online, leading all towards more interest in the property. But realistically, we now obviously enter the pre-auction phase. This is where the property goes live on the market. It goes live back into the MLS. The remarks in the agent remarks and the public remarks have been changed. We've gone out with a bidding to start from price that's very competitive, that we've compared to all of the other properties that we're in competition with, and even the properties lower and above, making sure we appeal to the entire marketplace, being the best value per square foot in that market. Now, this here is where we will do at least 2 open houses or 2 showing windows a week for no larger than 2 hours at a time. We've actually restricted a lot of our people doing it an hour at a time, so that therefore we can funnel all of the interest through at those specific time points. Creating the atmosphere of competition is just as important as competition itself. You've got to cultivate it in order to make sure that you can leverage from it. But one of the really important parts in the lead up to auction, now the 2 to 6 week window, the time of that lead up will depend on the type of property, how long it might have been on the market previously, the price point of that property, all of those different things. So on that property in New York, it's getting really going for over $20 million. We're going to take 8 weeks. For other properties in a similar, more average price point for a marketplace, 3 weeks might be an average. It just really depends on what lead up we need. But the real important part is the language change and the leverage that we get from the auction process. 97% of the time we get an offer prior to auction day, even if it's a low offer. It allows us to have different conversations with people. One, it allows us to follow up with every interested party that's ever been through to say, hey, just so you know, we have an offer on the property. It may or may not stop the auction, but are you interested? Getting clear intent. The other part, that when we get inbound people that are interested in the property, whether we meet them at the open house or whether they're phoning, we can say, hey guys, I want you to know before we dive into this situation, we do have an offer on the property prior to auction, may or may not stop it. So if you're interested, we need to definitely get you there. It provides a different angle and makes sure that we are dealing with people in a serious sense. But all in all, leading into auction day, I want you to understand, however, leading into auction day, we really won't have a good understanding of what auction day looks like until probably 48 hours prior to auction is when we usually and typically get most of our registrations to bid. Remember, most people will probably place offers prior to auction to try and stop the auction. This will give us a very good gauge of where everything stands. Now, if we don't have the interest, most of the time our recommendation will be we need to obviously postpone the auction. We allow one postponement up for 2 weeks. Okay. We can't keep kicking the auction date down the road because it doesn't have a lot of validity in that auction date if we keep doing that. But realistically, if we don't have the right conditions in order to get the right result, we can postpone it. However, the beautiful part about auction from an agent perspective, sometimes a seller needs to see the marketplace for themselves, and sometimes they need to see that no one will even bid on their property at any price, or maybe the bids don't get to where they want it to be. If we know that it's going to fall short, sometimes still taking it to live auction, allowing the sellers to see that with their own 2 eyes can give them a really good perspective of the market. But all in all of these discussions, many discussions will happen prior to us getting there, and we will make a determination as a team whether we go to auction, whether we postpone, or maybe it might be going back traditionally. But all of these elements obviously have to come into play. Our auction bidding platform, as I mentioned to you, is all taken care of by the property portal. My Auction is the registration process. Everybody has to register to bid prior to. They have to verify their identity and they have to verify their financial situation with us as well. Now, if in fact there was a buyer on a property that wanted to buy it sight unseen, typically we will ask that buyer to send over the 3% of the bidding to start from price to the escrow account before they bid. So therefore, we know that they're serious, and if they don't commit, then we keep their money. However, most of the time, 98% of the time, a buyer would have seen the property prior to, actually been to it physically, might even have agent representation. So therefore, we know who they are. And if they are a known commodity, it works just like a traditional real estate sale. If they are the highest bidder on auction day, they need to have an earnest money check for 3% of the bidding to start from price delivered to escrow, or the wire needs to be initiated with proof by 5 p.m. that business day. But either way, bidders can bid anywhere in the world. However, obviously, we get a great audience from all over the world, but we usually get on average about 3,500 people that view our auctions, because we do auctions from New York to California to Canada to Mexico to Hawaii, all over North America, all at the same time at that individual auction event every 2 weeks at 12 o'clock on a Thursday. But long story short is that I want to show you a quick video that puts the auction process into perspective, and I'll give you a bit of context to this shortly.
Introducing 16 Corson Laguna Niguel. This stunning 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home has a wonderfully spacious 2,467 square feet of living space.
At $1,300,000 a bid offer called now, ladies and gentlemen. It's not where we start, it's where we finish. Your chance to bid $20,000 to get in play, and away we go. That's $1,320,000 online bid now, ladies and gentlemen. Panel 114 has it now at $1,320,000 a bid. Panel number 108 has it now to $1,140,000 it is. $1,440,000, $1,460,000 it is now, ladies and gentlemen, to $80,000 it is. If there is no better offer, no better bid at this point, we will sell the property to paddle number 131 online for $1,705,000. However, folks, we are going to be reducing the increment to $1,000 increments moving forward. I do have to make this unequivocally clear. If you do place any further bid, any further offer, this auction is being recorded based on the premise of this condition is the fact that you need to be completely non-contingent. 1,705,000 it is now, ladies and gentlemen, away we go. First time I call it out, ladies and gentlemen, are we done in silent? 1,705,000 the bid. Second time done in silent now, ladies and gentlemen, are you sure? Third final chance now, 1,705,000, we are going. We are going. We are done and sold. Congratulations, paddle number 1.
So one of the important things to note when it comes to this process is most people think that the auction itself is just simply starting the bid off at 1.3 and then selling it for 1,705,000. That's not the case. We've obviously sped that process up. That auction itself took about 8 minutes to conclude. But realistically, while I love the factor of how quick auction works, negotiating in those individual set constraints of that time is really, really effective. But it doesn't just simply happen that way. Regardless of whether the bid gets to 1,705,000 or it stops at 1,650,000, we will pause the auction, reach out to the highest bidders, try and get more money from them at that point, and make sure that even if it's over the reserve price, it doesn't matter. My job is to get the most money that somebody will pay, not to get the seller's expectations. And on auction day itself, we pause, we call the agent, we call the sellers, we make sure that we're obviously confirming instructions well before we make any decisions on that perspective. All the communication has happened prior to, yes, but on the day itself, things can change. And ultimately, we need to make sure that we give everybody a fair and equal chance to make those decisions appropriately. We're not about squashing deals together. However, with that said, those individual time constraints in those moments is why I believe that auction is the most effective negotiation, because within that moment, I'm calling the buyer, I'm calling the highest bidder, we're calling the other bidders on the property as well, making sure that we're getting the most out of them and getting a decision out of them right there and there in that situation itself. So therefore, I believe that time kills all negotiations, and the back and forward of a traditional negotiation process of counteroffers and the silly things that happen really kill the negotiation in my eyes. But there is ample communication before we bring the hammer down, making that decision. However, if we don't get the result on auction day, if we don't get it prior to auction as well, we then enter post-auction. So again, not selling prior to auction, not selling through the registered bidders on auction day. We don't sell the property even post-auction through the negotiation that might continue on longer than the auction event itself. Then we can postpone the auction for that one time for up to 2 weeks, or we might choose to go back to the traditional listing marketplace at that point in order to then list it effectively with a price from the feedback that we've captured from the marketplace. Or if you're an agent, you might want to realize a bad investment of your time and ultimately the seller isn't going to come to terms with the market. If you're a seller, then you might just be like, hey, I want to hold on to the property for now. But realistically, it provides all of those options. Now, in the what's next perspective, if your listing is currently on the market or you wanted to do this, we go through and we obviously have to arrange a few things in order to get everything done. Remember, the auction process is a front-loaded process in the sense of getting all reports, disclosures, and all of those documents up front so that therefore we have a cleaner deal at the end that everything is negotiated with well before it. Remember, even the terms of which they're going to be offering prior to auction, their bidding registration, they sign off basically an offer. They say, hey, this is what I want to offer, but the price will be determined at auction. These are the terms I'm going to be offering, and therefore we can approve or unapprove that. All of that happens before auction day itself, so we need to make sure we get all of that put into place. We have to determine if it's on the market, when are we putting it on hold, and then when are we coming back to market. We have to determine an auction date, what type of lead up in that 2 to 6 week time frame, maybe longer if it's a high price point. What is the bidding to start from? Taking a look at all the competition within your market, within other markets, and what other marketplaces are buyers looking in that might be looking in your market or might not even know about your market. The benefit to the auction process is that a lot of the times the highest bidder and the more emotional bidder will come from a market where they weren't even looking at the current market that you're in, and they become a buyer that's uneducated in that market, which they will pay more. They have nothing to compare it against. Then you've got also determining your reserve price up front, knowing what you want. And we obviously need to address that the whole way through and then determine the different showing windows and open houses that we are going to have on the property. But realistically, guys, that is the auction presentation. That is the process of which we take people through in order for them to feel comfortable. And realistically, I believe that that has worked the most effectively for our auction team is by showing them the chronological order. I know there's a great deal of information showing them the auction website, showing them an auction video. I know we're 42 minutes in to this podcast itself and this example of doing so. But realistically, I think you need to take the time and take the essence, because the moment that somebody's confused during the process is the moment that it all starts to unravel and they start not to trust it. And that applies for agents and it applies for sellers as well. Hopefully this is helpful. Keep in mind, you don't have to be a professional at this. The auction team will make sure that they do this presentation to any client that you would like us to do it to and give an example of how it all works. That is what we're here to do, is help refine that auction pitch. But if you are that independent person, we'll make sure this presentation is available to you, and hopefully this helps you get a little bit more of a grasp on how to pitch auction. Thanks so much. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.